TopMedTalk.
This bonus podcast, released on World Kidney Day, is part of a series supported by the No AKI campaign, a bioMérieux global campaign to raise awareness about acute kidney injury. Welcome to TopMedTalk. Thursday, the 10th of March, was World Kidney Day, and this podcast has been released to remind you of the importance of AKI, acute kidney injury. It's a going concern here on TopMedTalk. We'll start with Dr. Dan Engelman, Medical Director of the Heart, Vascular and Critical Care Units at Bay State Medical Center, an Associate Professor at the University of Massachusetts Bay State and an Associate Professor Adjunct at Tufts University School of Medicine. He told us recently here on TopMedTalk that the significance of AKI, acute kidney injury, should not be understated, particularly as it can develop into CKD, chronic kidney disease.
First of all, I think that the most important thing we need to talk about when it comes to AKI is that any AKI is horrible. It reduces both your short-term and long-term lifespan. That's the first problem that people don't realize. They think, cardiac surgeons as a whole think if you have a bump in your creatinine and it comes back to normal while you're in the hospital, problem solved. But it turns out you never get those nephrons back. They never come back. And the so what of that is you don't live as long. And why don't you live as long? Because you have a significantly higher risk of going into CKD as you get older. So that's the first thing. And the second is that we need to pay more attention to preventing this from bumping. Creatinine is a ridiculously delayed marker. By the time the creatinine bumps, the kidney has already the nephrons have died. So we need to prevent the creatinine bump, and we need to use novel biomarkers, and we need to use more attention to goal-directed fluid therapy to actually prevent postoperative AKI.
Dan Engelman there. We'll be hearing more from him later in today's podcast. Don't forget to check out the show notes for more information. www.topmedtalk.com. Sandra Kane-Gill is Professor of Pharmacy and Therapeutics at the University of Pittsburgh School of Pharmacy. She has secondary appointments in the School of Medicine in the Clinical Translation Science Institute, Department of Critical Care Medicine, and the Department of Biomedical Informatics. She also serves as Professor for the Centre for Critical Care Nephrology and Centre for Medical Machine Learning. Have a listen to what she had to say.
So how do we respond? How do institutions respond? How do health systems respond, right? They can develop a strategic approach to determining their level of commitment, seeing where they're at and their level of commitment towards kidney health, and deciding how they want to change or progress in that commitment. And if they want to change and progress, that requires developing an organizational plan for change. So some of the goals that can be achieved are early detection of acute kidney injury to prevent its occurrence, right? And that can be accomplished with the use of clinical decision support, or possibly these newer, more novel biomarkers can help in identifying those high-risk patients. Another goal is, AKI detection as soon as possible, because that can help to prevent complications, reduce severity, reduce the duration of acute kidney injury. Again, another opportunity for clinical decision support surveillance. A third goal can be for those patients who develop acute kidney injury that the follow-up is better, and maybe during that time of AKD, they don't progress on to CKD. But all this requires health systems to develop structured, sound implementation projects with intentional implementation interventions that meet these goals. Moving up towards prevention, towards finding the best ways, the best interventions, the best detection systems to find those patients who are at high risk for developing acute kidney injury, develop strategic approaches to intervening so the AKI never occurs. That would be a moderate level of commitment. And then moving on to think about post-hospitalization and better care and follow-up for these patients who've developed acute kidney injury, in addition to use those moderate and low levels of commitment. That combining those three would be a high level of commitment. Now, really, there's an appreciation that institutions don't necessarily sit in just one category. They could be doing some things in low and some things in high. But to really consider yourself progressing from one level to the next, it would require that the institution decides all the things they want to do to achieve a reactive response, all the things they want to do to achieve a preventative response, all the things they want to do to achieve a follow-up response. And once they've identified and delivered and optimized all of the responses in one category, then they can rank themselves as a higher category. Again, realizing they may be doing some across these different categories, but not really ranking themselves as complete until all of the things they wanted to accomplish in each one of these categories is done.
Sandra Kane-Gill there. We'll be hearing more from her later on. But if you want to hear the full presentation she gave at our most recent evidence-based perioperative medicine, EBPOM, conference, check out the links in the show notes. Back to Dan Engelman, in conversation with our lead presenter, Desiree Chappell, and our editor-in-chief, Professor Monty Mython.
Dan, you came in to speak to us at EBPOM in Dallas this last year, and I remember you saying that you had gotten your rate of AKI down to 0. First of all, how is that possible? And second of all, do people actually know what their AKI rates are after surgery?
So in the year that we did our trial, we had 1 AKI. So it wasn't 0, but it was almost 0. 1 case of AKI. And that's stage 2 and 3 AKI. So it's a very liberal definition of AKI by the KDIGO definition. We need to prevent the creatinine bump, and we need to use novel biomarkers, and we need to use more attention to goal-directed fluid therapy to actually prevent postoperative AKI. And that means that we don't go into a patient's room who has a decreased urine output and has received a fluid the prior day in the operating room and say, well, they need Lasix. You have to actually look at the patient. Just because they have fluid overload does not mean that that fluid is intravascular. And you need to look at the patient and see if they're fluid responsive. Some patients need Lasix. Some patients need volume. Some patients need an inotrope. Some patients need an echocardiogram to figure out whether they have cardiac tamponade, but you need to actually spend some time at it, and you can prevent AKI. I use a biomarker called NephroCheck. It's commercially available, and I measure it the morning after cardiac surgery, very early. So I have it on morning rounds. And based on that, how does it change things? Actually, the best part of the biomarker is the patients who have a negative biomarker. They get my, quote, fast-track protocol.
Yeah.
I take the lines, they're not on any pressure, send them to the floor, give them Lasix, get the fluid off early, and their kidneys are resilient. They will not go into AKI. So that's half my patients. Now, if they have a positive biomarker, that's when I start going a little deeper. Their creatinines are all normal. Forget about measuring a creatinine post-op day morning 1. They're all normal. I mean, it's just worthless. So if you can't use that biomarker, creatinine, so then if it's positive, I start looking at the patient a little closer. Now, if you're not using biomarkers, look at urine output. That's urine output without Lasix. And if they're oliguric, less than 0.3 to 0.5 cc's per kilo, especially if it's over 3 hours, get worried because the creatinine is normal, but there's a problem. And you need to look closer at those patients. You can't just give them all Lasix. 70% or so actually are intravascularly depleted the morning after surgery, and they need volume. Yes.
And Dan, if I've got it right, Dan, that NephroCheck tells you that the kidneys are hurting, not that they're broken.
Exactly. It's a stress marker. It's a G1 cell cycle arrest marker, 2 of them, TIMP2 and IGF-7, and they're released when the milieu for making new nephrons is unfavorable. And it's the kidney talking to itself and saying, stop, let's not reproduce because the environment has low oxygen delivery. Something's wrong. And it's a very early marker.
Is it fair to say, if you can get it down to close to 0, that most AKI is iatrogenic? I.e., if you can, we must be causing it if we can almost completely avoid it.
Well, there are rare circumstances where patients have very little renal functional reserve. So they had in the past probably an insult, they had prior surgery. They may come in with a normal creatinine, but their kidney has no reserve. So there's nothing you can do about it. You're going to put them on pump and they're going to get a bump in their creatinine. But in general, I would say that a patient who has a cardiac catheterization and a diload then gets NPO and gets a little bit dry, then has cardiac surgery where their nadir hematocrit gets low, their pump flows are low, their O2 delivery on pump is low, they're used to being hypertensive, we're running them normotensive, and postoperatively, same story, labile, blood pressure. We are contributing to it. Yes, we are.
Back to Sandra Kane-Gill now and the subject of biomarkers.
Biomarkers. Okay. And so before there's a rise in serum creatinine, but just after kidney insult, biomarkers such as NGAL, TIMP2, IGF-BP7, and KIM1, if they rose, it could indicate a subclinical AKI, suggesting this risk for, high risk for a patient to develop acute kidney injury. An opportunity for earlier intervention. So obtaining this better understanding of potential prognosis could allow for a more aggressive management strategy, more aggressive monitoring, and even application of treatment if it were available.
So, how do practitioners emphasise this? How do we get from where we are to where we want to be? Dan Engelman makes the case for a data-driven, evidence-based approach.
It's hard. First, you got to get the surgeons to buy in. You have to actually show them the data. And that's what I've been trying to do. I've been trying to show them the data, present it to them in a cognizant fashion. I'm a surgeon, so I can kind of relate to them and understand where they're coming from. I've been in the trenches. I've been doing it the way everybody else has been doing it for years. And I realize there's a better way, and I try to explain it to them. It's going to be very hard to change cardiac surgeons unless we start training the trainees. We have to start from the beginning because cardiac surgeons are very stuck in their ways and it's difficult. We're stuck in our ways and we need to be encouraged with data. We need good data. We need institutions that are willing to get clinical coordinators to collect the data, share best practice, publish, and it'll move the bar. We're stuck in our ways and we need to be encouraged with data. We need good data. We need institutions that are willing to get clinical coordinators to collect the data, share best practice, publish, and it'll move the bar. I do think there should be more widespread use of this biomarker. It's like the ultimate early warning sign that there's low O2 delivery to the entire body. It's amazing because when it's elevated, something is wrong. Something's wrong. It's about $100 a test. So you have to act on it. You can't just measure it and then magically think that you're going to reduce kidney injury. You have to be willing to act on the positives. But the good news is you can also act on the negatives. You just get them off their pressors. You absolutely don't transfuse somebody with a hemoglobin over 7 who's got a negative nephro check. You just don't. And you give diuretics and move them on. So that's why my length of stay didn't go up at all, total. Some patients went really quick and others we held back. And those are the ones we stopped the kidney injury.
Don't forget the fuller conversations from which these clips have been taken are available. Check out the show notes. And we hope that after listening to this podcast, you'll see why, for an enhanced recovery practitioner, World Kidney Day is always important. It's a reminder to us of the significance of conditions such as AKI. We'll let Dan Engelman have the last word. Here he picks up a theme we often express on TopMedTalk, the importance of teamwork and the multidisciplinary approach.
You need a multidisciplinary team. You can't do it alone. Nothing in this entire ERAS works like a team. You need a whole team. In our case, it was led by intensivists and nephrologists. We rounded with a nephrologist. So every morning we had a couple positives and they'd say, all right, I'm going to go see those and let's work it out. And let's together come up with a plan on every single patient. So it requires work and we have to work as a team. And it's a lot of work and you need data. That's the last piece. Everybody loves seeing data. So we have these monthly meetings where we show up beautiful graphs of all our metrics and you see improvement. Boy, it's just, it never stops. It works just great when you see less readmissions, decreased length of stay, decreased time in the intensive care unit, decreased ventilator, decreased blood transfusions. I mean, everybody gets it immediately. And that's how you move the ball forward, data.
TopMedTalk. Thanks for downloading TopMedTalk. Don't forget to subscribe via your podcatcher. Don't forget to check us out on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And also, don't forget, TopMedTalk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that. If you check out ebpom.org, you can find low prices on some of the conferences we're organising around the world. Many of them are virtual and don't even involve you leaving your own home. Check out ebpom.org now.